There is a silence in the forest that does not feel empty. It feels aware, not hostile, not kind, just watching. The air is thick, heavy with moisture. Sunlight filters through layers of green, dissolving into gold dust between the trees. And then you realize something. You are alone. No signal, no path, no voices. Just miles of living wilderness breathing around you. And in that exact moment, your body changes. Not slowly, instantly. Before you even decide to be afraid, your brain already has. Deep inside your skull, a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala detects uncertainty. Not danger, not yet, just uncertainty. And uncertainty to the human brain has always meant one thing: possible threat. Within milliseconds, the amygdala signals the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus triggers the sympathetic nervous system, and suddenly, your adrenal glands release adrenaline, your heart rate increases, your pupils widen, blood redirects from digestion to muscle, glucose floods into your bloodstream. You didn't choose this reaction. It is older than language, older than civilization, older than memory. This is survival science. This is your biology activating a system refined over hundreds of thousands of years. You take a breath, but it feels different, shallower, faster, because adrenaline binds to beta-adrenergic receptors in your lungs, expanding the airways, preparing you to run, even if you were standing completely still. The forest hasn't moved, but your body has. Your hearing sharpens. Small sounds become amplified. Leaves shifting. Water moving somewhere unseen. A branch cracking in the distance. This is not imagination. Adrenaline heightens sensory perception by increasing neural firing in your sensory cortex. Your body is not panicking. It is optimizing for the next decision. And decisions in the wild cost energy. Within minutes, your liver begins breaking down glycogen into glucose, stored energy, emergency fuel. Because your brain, despite being only about 2% of your body weight, consumes nearly 20% of your energy at rest. Under stress, even more. You feel alert, sharp, focused. But there is a hidden cost. Adrenaline is powerful, but it is short-lived. If the situation does not resolve quickly, a second system activates. The HPA axis, hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal. This system releases cortisol. Unlike adrenaline, cortisol is patient, strategic. It ensures glucose remains available. It suppresses non-essential systems. Your digestion slows. Your immune response temporarily decreases. Reproduction hormones decline. Because survival comes first. In modern life, this system activates during traffic, deadlines, social pressure. But here, in the wild, it activates for its original purpose: to keep you alive. You swallow. Your mouth feels slightly dry. That is not coincidence. Under stress, saliva production decreases. Another conservation mechanism. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is random. You look around again. The trees are tall, ancient, indifferent, and something shifts inside you. The realization that the forest does not care whether you survive. And yet, your body does. Fiercely. Every cell is now working toward one outcome: continuation. Your pulse stabilizes slightly, but your muscles remain primed.
ready. This is the first hour, and it determines everything. Because the greatest threat in the first 72 hours is not starvation, it is not dehydration, it is not predators, it is uncontrolled stress. If fear escalates unchecked, cortisol remains elevated, decision-making deteriorates. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for logic and planning, becomes less active. The amygdala becomes louder. Emotion overrides strategy, and in the wilderness, a single impulsive decision can cost more energy than you can afford. So survival, in its purest scientific form, begins not with fire, not with shelter, not with water, but with regulation. Control your breathing, slow your pulse, conserve your glucose. Because your body is powerful, but it is not infinite. The forest remains silent, but inside you, a symphony of hormones, neurons, and metabolic pathways has begun. This is not weakness. This is not panic. This is adaptation. The first ancient program activating. The first biological negotiation between fear and reason. And in that negotiation, your survival begins. This is the science of the first 72 hours, and the silence has only just begun.
The first hour does not begin with movement, it begins with chemistry. You are still standing in the forest, but inside your bloodstream, a storm has already started. Adrenaline, epinephrine, is now circulating rapidly. Released from the adrenal medulla, it travels through your blood at extraordinary speed, binding to receptors across your body like a master key, unlocking emergency systems. Your heart responds first. It beats harder, not just faster, stronger. Cardiac output increases. More blood, more oxygen, more fuel. Because survival is not passive, it is energy intensive. Your lungs expand more deeply, bronchioles widen, air moves faster into alveoli, oxygen transfer increases. Within seconds, your blood oxygen saturation optimizes. Your body is preparing for action you haven't taken yet. This is predictive biology. The brain would rather overreact than underreact. Evolution did not reward hesitation. In early humans, uncertainty in the wild often meant predators, so the nervous system evolved to treat ambiguity as potential threat. The cost of a false alarm was minimal. The cost of ignoring real danger was extinction. So now, here in the forest, your sympathetic nervous system dominates. Blood vessels in your skin constrict. That's why your hands may feel slightly cooler. Blood is being redirected to large muscle groups, quadriceps, hamstrings, back muscles. Because if you need to run, your body wants those muscles ready. At the same time, digestion slows dramatically. The stomach reduces activity. The intestines pause peristalsis. Because digesting food requires energy, and energy must now be reserved. Even your immune system begins temporary suppression. Inflammation pathways quiet down. Why? Because long-term healing is irrelevant if short-term survival fails. This is biological prioritization at its purest. You feel alert, hyper-aware, but there is another layer beneath that alertness. Time perception changes. Under adrenaline, your brain increases norepinephrine signaling in the locus coeruleus. This can create the illusion that time is slowing down. Moments feel longer. Details appear sharper. This is not magic. It is enhanced memory encoding under stress. Your brain is capturing more data per second, trying to calculate risk,
trying to predict outcome, trying to map escape. The forest remains still, but your internal landscape is accelerating. And yet, there is a limit. Adrenaline peaks quickly. It is powerful, but metabolically expensive. Within minutes, your body must decide, is this threat immediate or sustained? And that decision determines what happens next.
Adrenaline is the spark. Cortisol is the strategy. If uncertainty persists, your hypothalamus activates a slower, more enduring pathway, the HPA axis. Hypothalamus, pituitary gland, adrenal cortex. A hormonal relay system designed for prolonged stress. Cortisol begins to rise in your bloodstream. Unlike adrenaline, cortisol does not shout. It calculates. It ensures glucose remains available. Your liver increases gluconeogenesis, producing new glucose from amino acids. Your muscles begin to release stored protein if necessary. Not dramatically, not yet, but the process has begun. Because your brain cannot afford fuel shortage. The human brain consumes immense energy, and under stress, its demand increases. Decision-making burns glucose. Risk assessment burns glucose. Fear burns glucose. You swallow again. Still dry. Cortisol reduces saliva production further. Your throat tightens slightly. You may interpret it as anxiety, but biologically it is resource allocation. Your senses sharpen again, but something subtle shifts. Adrenaline creates explosive alertness. Cortisol creates sustained vigilance. This is the difference between sprint and endurance. If stress remains controlled, this system supports survival. If stress spirals, cortisol becomes harmful. Excess cortisol begins impairing the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for rational planning. Long-term thinking weakens, impulsivity increases, tunnel vision appears. In the wild, tunnel vision can be fatal because survival requires broad awareness, not fixation. Your breathing becomes critical now. Slow breathing activates the vagus nerve. The parasympathetic system pushes back. If you slow your breath, you lower heart rate variability. You reduce cortisol output. You regain cognitive clarity. This is not philosophy. It is measurable physiology. The first hour is a negotiation between ancient instinct and conscious control, between amygdala and prefrontal cortex, between reaction and regulation. And survival favors the regulated mind. By now, nearly an hour has passed. You have not run, you have not fought, you have not found water or shelter yet, but internally, you have burned energy. Your glycogen stores in the liver are decreasing, not critically, but noticeably. Glycogen is limited. Once depleted, your body shifts to fat metabolism. That transition is slower, less explosive, which means impulsive movement in the first hour can cost more than you realize. This is why trained survival experts emphasize one principle: stop, breathe, think. Because the greatest loss in the first hour is not physical strength, it is wasted energy. Under stress, humans tend to move excessively, searching frantically, walking without direction, burning glucose, sweating, dehydrating faster. Every unnecessary step accelerates metabolic decline. The forest does not require speed, it requires strategy. Your pulse begins to stabilize slightly now, if you have regulated your breath, if you have chosen stillness over panic. This is adaptation in real time. Your body begins recalibrating. Heart rate lowers, blood pressure steadies, energy output becomes more efficient. You are no longer in explosive survival mode. You are entering calculated endurance mode. This transition from chaos to control is the most important shift of the first hour, because the forest tests not muscle, not bravery, but discipline. Science shows that individuals who maintain cognitive control under acute stress have significantly higher survival probability, not because they are stronger, but because they conserve metabolic resources. Energy is life, glucose is life, water is life, and in the first hour, you are deciding how much of it you will waste. The silence around you remains unchanged, but inside, the storm is settling, not because danger is gone, but because you have chosen regulation over reaction. The first hour is not about escape, it is about stabilization. Your biology has done its part, now your decisions must do the rest, and the next 71 hours will depend on how well you mastered this one.
The first shock is over. Your heart is no longer racing wildly. But do not mistake calm for safety. Inside your body, something critical is happening. Adrenaline, that explosive electric hormone, was never designed to last. It spikes fast. It fades fast. Now your system transitions from emergency mode to sustained survival mode. Your liver has been breaking down glycogen, stored carbohydrate, into glucose. This is called glycogenolysis. It happens automatically because the brain refuses to run out of fuel. Glycogen stores, however, are limited. In a well-fed adult, the liver holds roughly 80 to 100 grams of glycogen. Muscles store more, but muscle glycogen is selfish. It is reserved for movement, not for thinking. So, every step you take in uncertainty costs you. Every unnecessary movement accelerates depletion. You feel alert, but slightly warmer. That warmth is metabolic activity increasing. Your body is burning through accessible fuel. Cortisol now rises steadily in your bloodstream. Unlike adrenaline, cortisol works slowly but deeply. It ensures glucose remains available. It tells your body, prepare for a prolonged challenge. Blood sugar stays elevated. Digestion remains suppressed. Immune function lowers slightly because energy must be prioritized. And energy is finite. You pause. You listen. Your breathing is more controlled now. But notice something subtle. Your thoughts are slightly faster, slightly sharper. This is cortisol enhancing memory consolidation and vigilance. It is useful for now. But cortisol has a paradox. In short bursts, it improves survival. Over hours, if unmanaged, it begins to impair judgment. The forest remains still, but inside you, fuel is being rationed. If you move constantly, glycogen stores may significantly drop within hours. If you panic, you burn more. If you breathe steadily and reduce unnecessary motion, you conserve. Survival science is not dramatic, it is economical. The first 6 hours are not about heroics, they are about restraint. Your body is beginning to ask a question. Is this a sprint or a marathon? And your answer, through behavior, determines what happens next.
Time moves differently in the wild. Minutes stretch, silence deepens. Your body, however, tracks time precisely. By hour 2 or 3, glycogen reserves begin to decline. Not empty yet, but noticeably lower. And when glucose availability begins to fall, the body activates another system, lipolysis, the breakdown of stored fat into fatty acids. Fat is abundant, dense with energy, but slower to mobilize. This transition is critical. Fat metabolism produces energy steadily, but it requires oxygen and calm physiological conditions. If your stress remains too high, fat utilization becomes less efficient. This is why panic is metabolically expensive. Your breathing must stay controlled, deep, rhythmic. because oxygen delivery determines how effectively you burn fat. You may feel the first signs of subtle fatigue, not weakness, just heaviness. Your muscles are no longer fueled purely by rapid glucose. They are adapting. Your body is shifting from high-intensity fuel to endurance fuel. This is an ancient mechanism. Our ancestors survived long hunts, long migrations, long nights, because the human body is extraordinarily efficient at switching energy sources. You swallow again. Your mouth feels drier. Under prolonged sympathetic activation, saliva remains reduced. Dehydration risk begins not at thirst, but at neglect. You may not feel thirsty yet, but you are losing water through breath, through sweat, through metabolic reactions. Even mild dehydration, as little as 2% body weight loss in fluids, can impair cognitive function. Focus narrows, reaction time slows, decision-making becomes less precise. In modern environments, this would be inconvenient. In the wild, it is dangerous. The forest does not attack. It waits for inefficiency, and biology rewards efficiency. You begin to move less impulsively, more deliberately. Your survival now depends less on speed and more on energy budgeting. Your body is no longer in explosive mode. It is in strategic mode. And strategy begins inside the bloodstream.
By hour 4, something subtle shifts again. The initial hormonal storm has stabilized. Cortisol remains elevated, but not spiking. Adrenaline pulses only when triggered by sudden stimuli. Your heart rate is lower than the first hour, but your reserves are thinner. This is the window where mistakes are made, because you no longer feel immediate danger, yet your metabolic margin is shrinking. If you have been moving excessively, glycogen may now be significantly reduced. Your body begins increasing gluconeogenesis, producing glucose from non-carbohydrate sources. This includes amino acids. In extreme cases, from muscle tissue. The body will sacrifice strength to protect brain function, because the brain is command, always. You sit or you stand still, and you notice your perception changing. Sounds feel slightly distant. Time feels stretched. This is cognitive load increasing under sustained cortisol exposure. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for complex reasoning, consumes significant energy. If energy drops, efficiency drops, and emotional centers gain influence. Fear may return, not as panic, but as doubt. Doubt consumes energy. Worry consumes energy. Mental rehearsal of worst-case scenarios consumes glucose. This is why calm is not motivational advice. It is biological strategy. If you regulate your breathing, if you reduce unnecessary motion, if you avoid catastrophic thinking, your metabolic burn slows. And slowing the burn means extending survival time. The first 6 hours are not about hunger. They are not about thirst. They are about energy mismanagement. Most people underestimate this phase. They assume danger begins when food runs out. But in reality, danger begins when glucose drops below clarity, when stress exceeds control, when the body burns faster than it can adapt. The forest remains unchanged. The trees are still. The air is steady. But inside you, a negotiation is underway between expenditure and conservation, between biology and behavior. And the outcome of this negotiation will determine how you enter the next 18 hours. Because by hour 6, your body has stopped reacting and started adapting. And adaptation is the difference between endurance and collapse. The first day does not break you, it recalibrates you.
By now, the surge of adrenaline from the beginning has softened. Your heart is no longer racing without control. Your breathing has steadied. But something deeper has changed. Inside your liver, glycogen stores are dropping. Glycogen, your body's rapid access fuel reserve, exists for moments like this. Under stress, it is broken down into glucose to keep your brain alert and your muscles ready. But glycogen is limited. In most healthy adults, it can sustain high alertness for roughly 12 to 18 hours without new food intake. And when it begins to run low, your body shifts strategy. Not dramatically, quietly. You may not feel it at first, but the metabolic conversation has begun. Insulin levels decrease, glucagon rises. The body transitions from carbohydrate reliance to fat utilization. This is not starvation. Not yet. This is adaptation. Fat cells begin releasing fatty acids into the bloodstream. The liver prepares to convert some of these into ketone bodies, an alternative fuel. Your brain, which prefers glucose, will gradually learn to use them. But this transition is not seamless. You may feel lightheaded, a subtle mental fog, a slight irritability without clear cause. This is not weakness, it is biochemical negotiation. Your body is asking, do we have more energy coming? And when the answer is no, it begins conserving. Movements become more economical. You may notice you pause longer before standing. You scan your surroundings with more intention. Because now, energy matters. Every unnecessary step costs ATP, the molecular currency of energy inside your cells. And ATP production is no longer abundant. The forest remains unchanged, but your internal economy has shifted into conservation mode. This is hour 24 approaching, and the first silent trade-off has begun. When food intake stops for a full day, the body escalates its strategy. Glycogen is nearly depleted. Fat metabolism increases. But fat alone cannot fully support certain biological demands. So the body does something extraordinary. It turns inward. Through a process called gluconeogenesis, your liver begins producing glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, primarily amino acids. And amino acids come from protein, and protein exists in muscle. This does not mean immediate muscle loss that you can see. It means microscopic breakdown, small, controlled dismantling of tissue to maintain blood glucose levels, especially for your brain. Because your brain is not negotiable. If glucose drops too low, confusion begins, disorientation, poor judgment. So your body sacrifices structure to preserve clarity, at least temporarily. This is why prolonged stress without nourishment leads to weakness. Not because the forest attacks you, but because biology begins reallocating resources. Meanwhile, cortisol remains elevated. Cortisol ensures energy remains available, but sustained cortisol also suppresses immune efficiency. Tiny cuts heal slower. Inflammation response shifts. Your body prioritizes survival over long-term maintenance. And here lies the paradox. The very hormone that helps you endure can weaken you if it remains too long. You may now feel fatigue in your limbs, a heaviness not from distance walked, but from metabolic shift. Standing feels slightly more deliberate. You begin to choose stillness, not emotionally, biologically. The forest is not demanding you move. Your body is suggesting you conserve. This is intelligent survival. This is evolutionary design. By the end of the first 24 hours, the true battlefield is no longer physical. It is neurological. Cortisol has been circulating for hours. Adrenaline spikes have come and gone. Glucose levels fluctuate. Sleep, if attempted, is shallow. and the brain begins to feel the cost. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational planning and impulse control, becomes less efficient under sustained stress. The amygdala, however, becomes more reactive. This shifts perception. Small sounds may feel larger than they are. Shadows may appear threatening. Neutral stimuli feel significant. This is not imagination. Functional MRI studies show that prolonged stress enhances amygdala activity while reducing prefrontal regulation. In simple terms, emotion grows louder, logic grows quieter. And in the wild, this imbalance can shape decisions. You may feel sudden urgency to move without clear direction, or a wave of doubt about choices already made. You may overestimate danger or underestimate risk. This is the cognitive cost of sustained cortisol. At the same time, dehydration may begin influencing cognition. Even a 2% loss of body water can impair concentration and memory recall. Your thoughts may feel slower, words harder to retrieve, focus shorter. The forest remains silent, but inside your skull, neurotransmitters are adjusting. Serotonin fluctuates, dopamine shifts. Your brain is recalibrating to scarcity. And yet, you are still alive. Your heart is still beating. Your lungs still draw air. Your cells continue producing ATP. Because the human body is not fragile, it is adaptive. The first 24 hours are not about collapse. They are about transition, from abundance to efficiency, from reaction to endurance, from fear to strategy. And this is where survival becomes less about instinct and more about discipline. Because the next 48 hours will test not just your body, but your control over it. By the time 48 hours have passed, something subtle but profound begins to change. The forest looks the same. The trees stand tall. The light still filters through the canopy. But inside your body, the chemistry is no longer the same. The first day was dominated by adrenaline, fast, explosive, immediate. But adrenaline was never meant to last. Now, cortisol has taken control. Not in seconds, in hours, and cortisol changes the rules of survival. Cortisol is often misunderstood as a bad hormone. It is not. It is a regulator, a long-term strategist, released through the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the adrenal cortex. It ensures one thing: energy availability. After 24 hours, glycogen stores in your liver are nearly depleted. That emergency sugar reservoir, almost gone. So the body shifts. It activates gluconeogenesis, the creation of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, a process elegant and costly. Amino acids from muscle tissue begin to break down. Protein becomes fuel. This is not dramatic. You won't feel muscle disappearing, but metabolically it is happening. The body is prioritizing the brain, because the brain must remain online at all costs. And yet, even the brain is changing. Under sustained cortisol exposure, the amygdala becomes more reactive. Threat detection increases. Hypervigilance sharpens, but the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thought, becomes less efficient. This is where survival turns psychological. The forest hasn't grown more dangerous, but your interpretation of it might. Small sounds feel amplified, shadows seem deeper, uncertainty feels heavier. This is not weakness, it is neurochemistry. Cortisol increases glucose supply, yes, but chronically elevated cortisol also alters synaptic transmission. Decision-making slows, risk assessment shifts. You may begin to overestimate danger or underestimate consequences, and both can be fatal in the wild. Meanwhile, your metabolism continues to adapt. Insulin levels remain low, fat breakdown increases, ketone bodies begin to circulate. Your brain, which normally prefers glucose, starts to experiment with ketones as alternative fuel. This transition is not smooth. You may feel mental fog, irritability, moments of clarity followed by fatigue. Your body is recalibrating, and recalibration consumes energy. By hour 48, your resting metabolic rate may begin to decrease slightly. This is evolutionary conservation, your body reducing unnecessary expenditure, lower spontaneous movement, reduced fidgeting, even slight reductions in body temperature. Every calorie counts now, but stress complicates conservation because stress burns fuel, even when you are sitting still. Cortisol maintains alertness. Heart rate remains slightly elevated compared to baseline. Sleep, if achieved at all, becomes lighter, fragmented. The forest at night feels longer, darker. Not because the forest changed, but because your neurobiology did. And this is the turning point. The first day was about immediate reaction. The second day is about endurance. The question is no longer, can you respond? The question becomes, can you regulate? Because survival at 48 hours is no longer about strength. It is about restraint. Restraint in movement, restraint in panic, restraint in decision-making. The body is conserving, but the mind must cooperate. And here lies the silent danger. If stress remains unregulated, cortisol continues to rise. Prolonged elevation can impair immune function, increase inflammation, disrupt memory encoding. You might struggle to recall direction or forget small but critical details, where water was found, where shelter was built. And memory in survival is a resource as valuable as food, as critical as water. So at 48 hours, the real battle is internal, not against hunger, not against thirst, but against dysregulation, because the same hormone that keeps you alert can slowly erode your clarity. The forest remains silent, but your endocrine system is negotiating every second. Energy versus preservation, alertness versus exhaustion, reaction versus control. And in that negotiation, your survival trajectory is being written. This is where endurance begins.
By the second sunrise, your body is no longer reacting, it is adapting. 48 hours in the wild does not look dramatic from the outside. The trees are still. The wind still moves through the canopy. But inside you, a quiet metabolic shift is underway. The easy fuel is gone. The liver's glycogen stores, your rapid access glucose supply, were largely depleted within the first 24 hours. Since then, your body has been manufacturing glucose from amino acids, breaking down muscle tissue to protect brain function. But muscle protein is not meant to be a long-term fuel strategy, so the body pivots. It turns to fat. Adipose tissue begins releasing fatty acids into the bloodstream. These fatty acids travel to the liver, and there something remarkable happens. The liver converts them into ketone bodies, beta-hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate, alternative fuel. At first, your brain resists. It prefers glucose. It has always preferred glucose. But by 48 hours, the transition has begun. Ketones start crossing the blood-brain barrier. Neurons adapt. Energy production stabilizes. This is metabolic flexibility.
an ancient evolutionary gift. Without it, humans would not have survived famine, migration, or isolation. But adaptation is not the same as comfort. During this transition, many people experience mental fog, slower reaction time, a strange heaviness behind the eyes. This is not weakness. It is bioenergetic recalibration. Your mitochondria, the power generators inside your cells, are adjusting fuel input. Efficiency shifts, and during that shift, output fluctuates. Meanwhile, another variable grows more critical: hydration. After 48 hours in a forest environment, especially a humid or warm one, dehydration becomes a silent amplifier of fatigue. Even a 2% loss in body weight from water can impair cognitive performance. At 3 to 4% loss, headache, reduced coordination, poor judgment. Blood volume decreases. Heart rate compensates. You may notice subtle dizziness when standing. This is orthostatic stress, blood pressure regulation becoming less precise. And dehydration does not only affect the brain, it affects thermoregulation. Your body relies on sweat evaporation to cool itself. But if fluids are limited, sweating efficiency declines. Core temperature can begin to rise during the day. At night, paradoxically, heat conservation becomes harder because energy reserves are lower, and energy is required to maintain internal temperature. The forest may feel colder now, even if the temperature hasn't changed. This is metabolic conservation in action. Your resting metabolic rate begins to dip slightly. The body lowers non-essential expenditure. Spontaneous movements decrease. Posture becomes more still. Even facial expressions may soften. This is not emotional surrender. It is caloric discipline. The body is negotiating survival in units of energy. Every step is evaluated, every movement taxed, and fatigue now becomes layered. There is muscular fatigue from protein breakdown and reduced glycogen. There is neurological fatigue from prolonged cortisol exposure. And there is psychological fatigue from sustained uncertainty. But here's the paradox. At 48 hours, true starvation has not yet begun. The body still has significant fat reserves. What you're experiencing is not collapse. It is transition from short-term emergency mode to long-term survival mode. And long-term survival mode is slower, more calculated, less explosive. This is where many survival outcomes are decided, not by dramatic events, but by energy mismanagement. If you continue moving excessively, if you allow stress to drive constant scanning, pacing, overexertion, you accelerate depletion. But if you regulate movement, slow breathing, reduce unnecessary exploration, prioritize shade, water, insulation, your metabolic shift stabilizes. Ketone production increases. Brain clarity may even slightly improve after the transition completes. There is a quiet steadiness that can emerge, a primitive efficiency, but only if stress is controlled, because cortisol remains active, and prolonged cortisol elevation increases protein breakdown, weakens immune signaling, alters inflammatory balance. A small cut now heals slower. A minor infection carries more risk. The body is still fighting, but it is fighting economically. The edge of fatigue at 48 hours is not dramatic collapse. It is subtle miscalculation, taking a longer route, ignoring early thirst, overreacting to a distant sound, underestimating the cost of climbing uneven terrain. Survival science teaches us energy is currency, water is stability, calm is efficiency. At this stage, the forest is no longer your greatest threat. Inefficiency is. And yet within this fatigue lies something extraordinary. The human body is not fragile. It is adaptive. Within 48 hours, it has shifted fuel systems, rebalanced hormones, adjusted neuro priorities, reduced metabolic waste, reorganized physiological hierarchy.
all without conscious instruction. You are not manually surviving, you are biologically surviving. The question is whether your behavior aligns with your biology, because at the edge of fatigue, instinct must be guided by regulation. This is where survival becomes quiet, slower breathing, measured movement, conservation. Not fear-driven action, but deliberate restraint. 48 hours does not mean the end. It means transformation, from reaction to adaptation. And adaptation is where endurance is forged.
By 48 hours, your body has adapted. But now, your mind becomes the battlefield. Not because you are weak, not because the forest is attacking you, but because prolonged stress reshapes perception. And perception in survival is reality. For 2 days, your nervous system has remained activated, not at maximum intensity, but above baseline. Cortisol has circulated steadily. Adrenaline has surged in waves. Sleep has been fragmented, light, shallow, easily interrupted. And sleep is not a luxury. It is neurological maintenance. During deep sleep, the brain recalibrates synaptic strength. It consolidates memory. It clears metabolic waste through the lymphatic system. Without sufficient restorative sleep, neural noise increases, signal clarity decreases. At 48 hours in a survival environment, you are not necessarily sleep-deprived in the clinical sense, but you are sleep-fragmented, and fragmentation alters perception. You may begin to notice subtle distortions. Shadows seem to move longer than they should. Sounds linger in your awareness. A branch snapping feels closer than it truly is. This is not hallucination in the dramatic sense. It is heightened threat anticipation. The amygdala, your threat detection center, has been sensitized by sustained cortisol exposure. It becomes more reactive, more efficient at detecting possible danger, but less accurate at distinguishing real threat from ambiguity. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning, impulse control, rational judgment, operates under reduced metabolic comfort. Glucose availability fluctuates. Ketone adaptation is ongoing. Cognitive flexibility narrows. This is the psychological threshold. Not madness, not panic, but narrowing. Your range of interpretation tightens. You may become more rigid in thinking, more attached to a specific plan, or, conversely, more impulsive, switching direction too quickly, second-guessing yourself repeatedly. Neuroscience shows that prolonged stress shifts decision-making from deliberate cortical processing toward faster, emotionally driven subcortical pathways. In simple terms, emotion becomes louder than logic. At this stage, isolation begins to amplify internal dialogue. Humans are profoundly social organisms. Even in silence, your brain expects social cues, conversation, feedback, shared vigilance. Without it, internal thoughts grow more pronounced. You may replay decisions repeatedly. You may mentally simulate worst-case scenarios. This is predictive coding, the brain trying to reduce uncertainty. But in an unpredictable environment, prediction consumes energy, and energy is limited. 48 hours also introduces another variable: loneliness-induced stress response. Research shows that perceived isolation can elevate cortisol further, not dramatically, but measurably. The body interprets isolation as vulnerability, and vulnerability sustains vigilance. You might begin to feel watched, not by something specific, but by possibility. The forest feels vast, and vastness can distort scale perception. Distances seem longer, landmarks feel less reliable. This is cognitive load interacting with fatigue.
The hippocampus, essential for spatial memory, is sensitive to prolonged stress hormones. Navigation becomes slightly less precise, not catastrophically impaired, but subtly less sharp. This is where small mistakes accumulate: a misjudged slope, a delayed overestimated distance to water, a delayed decision to rest. And here lies the most dangerous illusion at 48 hours, the illusion of urgency. When stress remains elevated, everything feels time-sensitive. You feel compelled to move, to act, to solve. But survival science teaches the opposite. At this stage, stillness can be safer than motion. Measured action is safer than rapid reaction. The psychological threshold is crossed when internal discomfort is mistaken for external threat. Your heart may beat faster, but there is no predator. Your breathing may be shortened, but there is no immediate chase. Your mind may generate scenarios, but the forest remains neutral. The challenge is distinguishing internal activation from external danger, and that requires metacognition, the ability to observe your own thoughts, to pause, to ask, is this fear based on evidence or chemistry? Because at 48 hours, chemistry is loud. Cortisol alters emotional tone. Fatigue reduces inhibition. Dehydration amplifies irritability. Together, they create a perceptual filter. But there is resilience embedded in your biology. The human brain is plastic. Even under stress, regulation is possible. Slow breathing stimulates the vagus nerve, activating the parasympathetic system, lowering heart rate, reducing amygdala reactivity. Extending exhalation slightly longer than inhalation increases vagal tone. This is not philosophy, it is physiology. Small regulation techniques conserve energy, stabilize cognition, restore decision bandwidth. At the psychological threshold, survival becomes less about physical endurance and more about perceptual discipline. The forest has changed nothing in 48 hours, but you have. You are leaner metabolically, more efficient energetically, but also more sensitive neurologically. This sensitivity can be an advantage if controlled. Hyper-awareness can detect real danger earlier. Calm scanning can reveal resources overlooked before. But if unregulated, it becomes anxiety. And anxiety burns energy faster than hunger. So the true test at 48 hours is not whether the body can continue. It can. Fat reserves remain. Ketone production increases. Metabolic slowdown preserves resources. The question is whether the mind can remain aligned with biology. Because the moment perception detaches from reality, risk multiplies. And yet, within this fragile psychological space lies something powerful: clarity. Not the sharp adrenaline clarity of day one, but a quieter steadiness. If you allow stress to settle, if you conserve movement, if you regulate breath, the nervous system recalibrates. Cortisol gradually stabilizes. Cognitive control strengthens. Decision-making widens again. The threshold becomes a gateway, not a collapse. 48 hours is not the breaking point. It is the refinement point, where survival shifts from reacting to the environment to mastering internal chemistry. The forest is still silent, and now you understand something deeper. Survival is not about defeating nature. It is about harmonizing with your own physiology. And at the psychological threshold, control is not force. It is restraint, not dominance, but alignment. 48 hours have passed. Your body has adapted. Your mind has been tested. And the silence is no longer swallowing you. It is waiting.
"72 hours. 3 rotations of the Earth. 3 cycles of light and darkness. And by now, the forest no longer feels unfamiliar. It feels endless. Your body is still alive, but something deeper is being tested. Not your muscles, not your hunger tolerance, your mind. Because around the 72-hour mark, survival becomes psychological. Your glucose reserves are largely depleted. Glycogen stores were exhausted within the first 24 hours. Your body has shifted toward fat metabolism. Ketone production has increased. Your brain, once dependent almost entirely on glucose, is now partially fueled by ketones. This is adaptation. But adaptation is not comfort. It is compromise. Your movements are slower now, not because you are weak, but because your metabolism has recalibrated. Basal metabolic rate decreases under prolonged stress and calorie deficit. Your body is conserving energy deliberately. Every step is calculated. Every motion costs something measurable. And then there is the mind. Cortisol has remained elevated for hours, possibly days, not at peak levels, but persistently above baseline. Chronic cortisol exposure begins to affect cognition. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational decision-making, becomes less efficient. Meanwhile, the amygdala remains sensitive. Emotion becomes amplified. Small sounds feel larger. Small doubts feel heavier. This is not fear, it is neurochemistry. Under prolonged stress, neural connectivity shifts. Your brain prioritizes survival-relevant stimuli. But here is the paradox. In a modern brain placed in a primitive environment, threat detection can become excessive. You may begin scanning constantly, listening repeatedly, rechecking the same direction twice. Hypervigilance. Evolutionarily useful, energetically expensive, and energy is now limited. Sleep has likely been fragmented. Even short-term sleep deprivation alters neurotransmitter balance. Dopamine regulation shifts. Serotonin levels fluctuate. Mood becomes unstable. You may feel sudden irritation, sudden hopelessness, or sudden clarity, all within minutes. This is the psychological threshold. Around 72 hours, many survival cases report a powerful internal shift. The realization that rescue is not immediate. Hope transitions from expectation to uncertainty. And uncertainty is metabolically costly because the brain consumes enormous energy attempting to predict outcomes. Prediction requires glucose, and glucose is scarce. So your brain simplifies. It narrows focus. Tunnel vision becomes more likely. Peripheral awareness decreases. Time perception may distort. Minutes feel longer, or hours disappear without notice. This is linked to stress hormone interaction with the hippocampus. The hippocampus, responsible for memory and spatial orientation, is sensitive to cortisol. Under sustained stress, spatial judgment can decline. And in a forest, spatial judgment is survival. You may question your direction, even if you were confident yesterday. You may doubt your previous decisions, even if they were rational. This is not weakness. It is the biological cost of endurance. Your body has done its part. Now your nervous system is negotiating sustainability. And yet, something extraordinary is also happening. Ketones, now circulating in higher concentration, are providing a more stable energy source for neurons. Unlike glucose spikes, ketones produce fewer rapid fluctuations. Some individuals report surprising mental clarity during extended fasting states. Calm focus, reduced anxiety. This is metabolic adaptation intersecting with cognition. The human body is not collapsing, it is recalibrating. But this recalibration requires one critical variable: emotional regulation. If panic reactivates the acute stress response, adrenaline surges again, heart rate increases, glucose demand rises, energy expenditure spikes, and reserves diminish faster. At 72 hours, energy management is no longer optional. It is strategy. The forest is quiet, but your internal landscape is louder than ever. Every decision now carries psychological weight. Do you move or stay? Search or conserve? Signal or rest? Each option has metabolic consequences, and your brain knows it. Because deep within your neural architecture, survival is not a thought, it is an algorithm, an ancient biochemical equation balancing risk against remaining fuel. The greatest threat at 72 hours is not starvation, it is despair. Hopelessness triggers behavioral shutdown. In neuroscience, this resembles learned helplessness patterns. Reduced initiative, reduced exploration behavior, reduced problem-solving behavior. Energy is conserved, but so is opportunity. And survival depends on adaptive action, not frantic action, not frozen in action, adaptive action. This is where regulation becomes power. Slow breathing reduces sympathetic activation. Inhaling through the nose stimulates vagal tone. The vagal nerve influences heart rate variability. Higher variability correlates with better stress resilience. Even here, in isolation, biology still offers leverage. Control breath, stabilize heart rate, lower cortisol, preserve clarity. The 72-hour mark is not a cliff, it is a threshold. Beyond it, the body can still endure, but only if the mind cooperates with metabolism. The forest has not changed. The trees remain indifferent. The wind continues moving through leaves with mechanical precision. But inside you, an extraordinary negotiation continues. Hormones balancing, neurons recalibrating, fuel sources shifting, emotion wrestling logic. This is survival science at its most intimate scale. Not dramatic, not explosive, but deeply biological. And at 72 hours, you are not just surviving the forest, you are surviving yourself. A slow pause, ambient sound softens. The next phase will determine whether adaptation stabilizes or whether stress begins to unravel what evolution so carefully built. 72 hours. By now, survival is no longer dramatic, it is cellular. The body has stopped reacting, it has started negotiating. And every negotiation has a cost. Your glycogen reserves are gone. What once fueled rapid movement has been exhausted. Now your body turns inward. Fat becomes the primary fuel. Lipolysis increases. Stored triglycerides break down into fatty acids. The liver converts part of these into ketone bodies, acetoacetate, beta-hydroxybutyrate, molecules that now feed your brain. This is not emergency anymore. This is metabolic transition. But fat metabolism is slower, less explosive. You feel it. Movements are deliberate. You no longer waste motion because your body cannot afford waste. And yet, fat is not enough. If calorie deprivation continues, the body begins another process, gluconeogenesis, the creation of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, including protein, which means muscle. Your body does not want to sacrifice muscle tissue, but survival prioritizes vital organs over strength. Amino acids are broken down, converted in the liver, sent into the bloodstream as glucose. Your biceps, your legs, your structural mass, all become potential fuel. You may not see it yet, but the breakdown has begun. And then there's water. Water is more urgent than food.
Without water, survival shrinks dramatically. By 72 hours, dehydration becomes the dominant variable. Even a 2% loss in body weight from fluid reduction can impair cognitive performance. Reaction time slows, memory falters, decision-making degrades. At 3 to 4% dehydration, blood volume decreases. The heart must work harder. Heart rate increases not from fear, but from reduced plasma volume. Blood thickens slightly. Circulation becomes less efficient. Your skin may feel warmer, but this is deceptive. Thermoregulation begins to strain. In a forest environment, temperature fluctuates. Daytime heat, nighttime cooling. Your body relies on sweat to dissipate heat, but sweat requires fluid. If fluid is limited, sweating decreases. Core temperature may rise. Hyperthermia becomes a risk. At night, without adequate caloric intake, internal heat production drops. Metabolism slows further. If the environment is cold, hypothermia becomes possible, even in climates not traditionally considered freezing. Because hypothermia is not about snow, it is about heat loss exceeding heat production, and calorie deficit reduces heat production. The body now performs a careful calculation. Preserve the brain, preserve the heart, reduce peripheral investment. Hands may feel colder, feet may lose sensitivity. Blood vessels constrict in extremities. This conserves warmth centrally, but it also reduces dexterity. Fine motor skills decline. Tie a knot, grip a branch, open a container. Tasks that once felt automatic now require focus, and focus consumes energy. Meanwhile, cortisol remains elevated, not dramatically, but persistently. Cortisol suppresses inflammation. This is helpful in acute stress, but prolonged elevation suppresses immune response. White blood cell function decreases. Wound healing slows. If you have minor cuts or insect bites, recovery is slower now. The body has redirected resources. Immune defense becomes secondary to immediate survival. Inside your brain, prolonged stress alters neurotransmitter balance. Serotonin pathways shift. Mood stability weakens. Dopamine signaling fluctuates. Motivation may decline unexpectedly, not because you are weak, but because your neurochemistry is reallocating priority. Energy is scarce. Motivation is metabolically expensive. Even digestion has changed. Gastric motility slows under stress and fasting. If you eat suddenly after prolonged deprivation, discomfort may occur. Your body has adapted to scarcity. It resists sudden change. This is biological inertia. And sleep. Sleep is no longer restorative. Without sufficient calories and hydration, deep sleep phases shorten. REM cycles may fragment. Sleep deprivation compounds cortisol dysregulation, which further impairs cognition. A feedback loop forms. Less sleep, higher stress hormones, reduced clarity. Reduced clarity, poorer decisions. Poorer decisions, higher energy expenditure. And in the wild, energy mismanagement accelerates collapse. But here's the extraordinary truth. Despite all this, the human body is still functioning. The heart still beats. The brain still adapts to ketones. The liver continues regulating glucose. The kidneys conserve water by concentrating urine. Antidiuretic hormone increases. Urine volume decreases. Fluid retention becomes priority. You may notice darker urine, stronger odor. This is the body preserving what remains. Nothing in you is random. Every shift is strategic. Every adjustment is calculated through millions of years of evolutionary refinement. But refinement does not mean invincibility. At 72 hours, the margin narrows. One mistake costs more now. One unnecessary burst of panic drains limited reserves. One impulsive sprint spikes heart rate, increases glucose demand, accelerates dehydration. The body is no longer in abundance mode. it is in efficiency mode, and efficiency requires calm, because calm lowers metabolic demand. Slow breathing reduces oxygen consumption. Reduced oxygen consumption lowers heart workload. Lower heart workload conserves energy. Energy conserved extends time, and time is survival currency. You may feel weaker, but weakness is not failure. It is adaptation to scarcity. You may feel slower, but slowness is conservation. You may feel emotionally fragile, but emotional volatility is a byproduct of endocrine strain. Your biology is under load, yet it persists. 72 hours is not the end. It's a checkpoint, a physiological audit, a moment when the body reveals its cost ledger: energy spent, water lost, muscle converted, hormones elevated, immunity reduced, temperature fluctuating, but still alive, still negotiating, still adjusting, still holding the line between adaptation and collapse. And the next phase will decide whether this biological cost stabilizes or compounds. Because survival is not only about enduring loss, it's about managing what remains.
72 hours. Not a myth, not a cinematic exaggeration, but a measurable biological threshold. By now, your body has revealed its strategies: glycogen depleted, fat mobilized, ketones circulating, cortisol sustained, water conserved. The question is no longer whether the body can adapt. It already has. The question now is, will adaptation stabilize, or will stress compound into collapse? Because survival is not a straight line. It is a balance, a biological equilibrium between demand and reserve. If demand exceeds reserve for too long, systems begin to fail. But if regulation matches expenditure, the body finds rhythm again. Inside your nervous system, something critical is happening. The amygdala has been active for days, but it cannot remain in constant alarm without consequence. Chronic hyperactivation increases neural sensitivity. Threat perception becomes exaggerated. Neutral stimuli feel significant. A shifting branch may feel intentional. A distant sound may feel directed. This is not paranoia, it is survival circuitry stretched thin. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning, impulse control, long-term reasoning, has been operating under metabolic strain. Glucose fluctuations, sleep deprivation, elevated cortisol, all reduce its efficiency. If emotional reactivity dominates, impulsive action follows, and impulsive action consumes energy. But here lies the turning point. Humans possess something rare in the animal kingdom: conscious regulation. You can influence your autonomic state. Slow breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, specifically through vagal stimulation. When vagal tone increases, heart rate variability improves. When heart rate variability improves, stress resilience increases. This is not motivational theory, it is measurable physiology. A slower breath reduces sympathetic output. Lower sympathetic output reduces adrenaline. Reduced adrenaline conserves glucose. Glucose conserved extends endurance. The forest does not change, but internal chemistry does. Adaptation stabilizes when perception shifts from threat to challenge. Psychologically, this transition is powerful. When the brain interprets stress as manageable rather than overwhelming, cortisol response moderates. Studies in stress appraisal show that mindset alters hormonal output. The event remains the same. The interpretation changes the biology. This is the thin line between adaptation and collapse. Collapse is rarely dramatic at first. It is subtle. Dehydration worsening quietly. Core temperature drifting gradually. Cognitive errors increasing incrementally. Motivation declining slowly. One missed signal, one miscalculated direction, one unnecessary expenditure of strength, and reserves fall below recovery threshold.
But adaptation looks different. Movements become slower but more intentional. Breathing becomes measured. Energy is allocated strategically. You stop scanning every sound. You prioritize essential tasks: shelter, water, rest, minimal movement during peak heat, insulation during cooling hours. Biology responds to strategy. Cortisol begins to taper if acute panic subsides. Heart rate normalizes closer to baseline. Metabolic demand decreases further. Ketone utilization becomes more efficient. The brain, now adapted to alternative fuel, regains partial clarity. This is metabolic flexibility, a hallmark of human survival capacity. Throughout history, humans survived famine, migration, exposure, not because they were the strongest, but because they were adaptable, physiologically flexible, neurologically capable of reframing threat. 72 hours tests that flexibility. It reveals whether the stress response remains adaptive or becomes self-destructive. Because the same hormones that save you early on can harm you if sustained unchecked. Excess cortisol impairs hippocampal function, spatial memory weakens, navigation errors increase. But if cortisol moderates, cognitive mapping stabilizes, decision quality improves, and survival probability increases. Even immune function, though suppressed, does not disappear. The body reallocates. It does not surrender immediately. The kidneys continue concentrating fluid. The liver continues balancing glucose. The heart continues adjusting stroke volume to compensate for lower plasma volume. This is not a system failing. It is a system recalibrating under constraint. Collapse occurs when recalibration is overwhelmed. Adaptation occurs when behavior aligns with biology. The forest does not choose. Your biology responds. And the extraordinary truth is this: even now, with limited fuel, with strained hormones, with imperfect sleep, your body is still fighting for continuation, still adjusting, still calculating, still holding the line. Because survival is not about avoiding stress, it is about mastering its chemistry. And if regulation prevails, 72 hours becomes not the edge of collapse, but proof of adaptation. The forest remains silent, but your biology has spoken. And in that silent negotiation, you discover something deeper than fear. You discover capacity.
"72 hours, 3 rotations of the Earth, 3 cycles of light and darkness. And yet, to the body, it feels longer. Because time under stress stretches. Not in minutes, but in metabolic cost. By the 3rd day in the wild, the human body is no longer reacting, it is adapting. The surge of adrenaline that once sharpened perception has faded. The first spikes of cortisol have stabilized into a new baseline. Your nervous system has recalibrated, and something remarkable happens. The body remembers how to survive. Long before cities, long before technology, long before language became structured thought, the human organism evolved inside environments like this. The stress response is not a flaw, it is an inheritance. When the amygdala first sounded the alarm, it acted within milliseconds. But now, 72 hours later, the prefrontal cortex slowly regains authority. Decision-making becomes deliberate. Breathing becomes measured. Movement becomes economical. Energy is no longer burned in panic. It is invested with intention. By this stage, glycogen stores are largely depleted. The body shifts more heavily into fat metabolism. Ketone bodies begin supplying fuel to the brain. This transition is not dramatic. It is subtle, but powerful. The brain, once dependent almost entirely on glucose, demonstrates metabolic flexibility. This is not weakness. It is design. The human body is engineered for fluctuation, for scarcity, for unpredictability. Cortisol, often misunderstood as harmful, has played its role. It ensured glucose availability. It suppressed unnecessary processes. It maintained blood pressure. But chronic elevation would be dangerous. And here lies the turning point. Survival is no longer about reacting to fear. It becomes about managing energy. Heart rate lowers compared to the first day. Muscle tension reduces. Micro movements become efficient. Even posture changes. The body conserves heat. Peripheral circulation adjusts. Hormonal balance shifts toward endurance rather than urgency. The silence of the forest remains unchanged, but the internal chaos has quieted. And this is where true survival begins. Because the greatest evolution in 72 hours is not physical, it is neurological. The brain learns the environment. Unknown becomes familiar. Threat perception recalibrates. The amygdala quiets slightly. The hippocampus begins mapping. Memory integrates. This is adaptation in real time. Not dramatic, not cinematic, but biological. The body that panicked on the first hour is not the same body standing here now. It has negotiated with fear. It has balanced chemistry. It has shifted fuel sources. And it has preserved itself. 72 hours is not the end. It is the threshold. The body remembers. And remembering is survival. Survival is often portrayed as physical strength, but in truth, it is cognitive endurance. During the first 72 hours, the greatest threat is not hunger, it is dysregulation. When cortisol remains elevated too long, the prefrontal cortex loses efficiency. Planning deteriorates, impulse increases, emotion overrides logic. But if stress is stabilized, something extraordinary occurs. Neuroplasticity activates. The brain begins adapting to sustained pressure. Attention narrows. Irrelevant stimuli are filtered out. Energy is redirected toward essentials. Even perception changes. Colors appear sharper under stress. Sounds feel amplified. But by the third day, perception normalizes. The nervous system shifts from acute alarm to strategic awareness. This is the difference between panic and survival intelligence. Hydration becomes critical. Even mild dehydration, around 2% body weight loss, reduces cognitive performance. Reaction time slows. Memory falters. Mood shifts. And yet, the body compensates. Blood volume adjusts. Kidneys conserve fluid. Urine output decreases. Hormones like vasopressin regulate retention. Nothing is accidental. Everything is regulated. The mind under pressure is not broken. It is negotiating resources. Sleep deprivation, common in survival conditions, further complicates cognition. After extended wakefulness, microsleeps may occur. Brief seconds where awareness flickers. Decision-making becomes fragile. This is why controlled breathing matters. Slow breathing stimulates the vagus nerve. It reduces sympathetic dominance. It lowers heart rate variability instability and restores cognitive clarity. Survival is not about fighting the forest. It is about stabilizing the internal storm. The forest remains neutral. It neither hunts nor protects. But your nervous system, that is the battlefield. And by 72 hours, if regulation has succeeded, the body and mind enter a fragile equilibrium. Stress remains, but panic does not. Energy is limited, but controlled, and clarity returns. This is resilience. Not loud, not dramatic. Quiet, measured, biological. The final truth of 72 hours in the wild is this. The human body is not fragile. It is adaptive. It was never designed for comfort. It was designed for challenge.
The first day tests reactivity. The second day tests endurance. The third day tests regulation. And regulation determines survival. By this stage, metabolic rate slightly decreases to conserve energy. The thyroid axis subtly adjusts. Movement becomes calculated. Every calorie matters. Every step has consequence. Yet within this constraint, there is strength. Ketones now provide stable fuel to the brain. Inflammatory markers may fluctuate, but the immune system remains active. Circulation prioritizes vital organs. The body has shifted from alarm to sustainability. And the most important transformation has occurred quietly. Fear no longer dominates. Uncertainty remains, but it no longer controls behavior. Because adaptation is the defining characteristic of our species. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans survived not because they were the strongest, but because they regulated stress. They conserved energy. They learned quickly. They adjusted. 72 hours does not make someone invincible, but it proves something fundamental. The human organism can endure more than the mind initially believes. The forest is still. Light moves through the canopy. Time continues. And within that stillness, the body stands regulated, balanced between depletion and resilience. Survival is not dramatic. It is disciplined biology. It is hormone balance, neural control, metabolic flexibility, and above all, adaptation. Because in the wild and in life, it is not the strongest who survive. It is the most adaptable. And the science of survival has never been about fear. It has always been about regulation.
"72 hours. 3 rotations of light and darkness. 3 nights of uncertainty. 3 days where the human body negotiates with nature. And yet, if you are still here, it means something extraordinary has happened. Not outside you, inside you. Because survival, in its purest scientific form, is not dramatic. It is cellular. It is chemical. It is quiet. By the third day, your body is no longer reacting. It is adapting. The adrenaline spikes that defined the first hours have softened. The frantic surge of epinephrine has given way to a slower hormonal rhythm. Cortisol remains present, but more controlled. Your metabolism has shifted. Glycogen reserves are largely depleted. Your body now relies heavily on lipolysis, the breakdown of stored fat into fatty acids. The liver converts some of these fatty acids into ketone bodies. And your brain, that energy-hungry organ, begins accepting ketones as an alternative fuel source. This is not weakness, it is metabolic intelligence. Humans evolved in environments where food scarcity was not rare. The ability to switch fuel systems, glucose to fat to ketones, is one of the reasons our species survived. By 72 hours, insulin levels are low. Growth hormone slightly increases. The body becomes more efficient with what little it has. Energy is conserved. Movements become deliberate. Waste becomes minimal. Even your thoughts begin to change. Not because you are losing control, but because your brain chemistry is recalibrating. When glucose availability decreases and ketones rise, many people report something unexpected. Clarity, a sharpened stillness. Because ketones produce fewer reactive oxygen species during metabolism, the brain, under certain conditions, can function surprisingly well in this state. But there is a boundary. Hydration. Water remains the most critical variable. Even mild dehydration, just 2% loss of body weight in fluids, can impair cognitive performance. Decision-making slows. Reaction time decreases. Mood becomes unstable.
Electrolytes shift. Blood volume decreases. The heart works harder. If water is found and conserved, the body stabilizes. If not, physiology begins to deteriorate rapidly. But assume you managed it. Assume you found water. Assume you regulated fear. What remains after 72 hours is not panic, it is perspective. The forest no longer feels like an immediate threat. It feels vast, indifferent, and strangely balanced. Your senses have adjusted. The hyper-alertness of the first day has transitioned to strategic awareness. The amygdala is quieter. The prefrontal cortex regains influence. Planning returns. Logic strengthens. And this may be the most important scientific truth of survival. The human nervous system is plastic. It recalibrates. It learns. Repeated exposure to stress, when managed, builds resilience. Not emotionally, biologically. Neural pathways reorganize. Hormonal responses become more efficient. Energy allocation becomes smarter. This is adaptation in real time. But adaptation does not mean comfort. Fatigue is present. Sleep deprivation affects coordination. Muscle protein breakdown may begin if energy deficit continues. The immune system remains suppressed under prolonged stress. Survival beyond 72 hours requires more than endurance. It requires strategy. But here is the revelation. The body you inhabit is not fragile. It is ancient. It is engineered by evolution to endure short-term extremes: cold, hunger, uncertainty. The real threat in the first 72 hours was never the forest. It was uncontrolled stress. Because panic wastes glucose. Fear accelerates dehydration. Impulsive movement burns calories that cannot be replaced. The science is clear. The individuals who survive initial wilderness exposure are not the strongest. They are the most regulated. Breathing slow. Movement intentional. Energy conserved. Cognition protected. This is not philosophy. It is physiology. The forest at dawn now feels different. The same trees, the same wind, but you are altered. Your metabolism has shifted gears. Your nervous system has recalibrated. Your perception has sharpened. You have experienced the raw interface between biology and environment, and you did not break. 72 hours is not the limit of human survival. It is the threshold. The moment where reaction becomes adaptation, where fear becomes calculation, where chaos becomes system. The silence which once felt threatening now feels informative. You can hear patterns, bird cycles, wind direction, water movement. Because survival is not domination over nature. It is synchronization with it. And perhaps the most powerful realization of all, modern life rarely demands this level of biological awareness. Artificial light replaces circadian rhythm. Constant food access removes metabolic flexibility. Noise replaces silence. But here, stripped of convenience, you rediscovered something fundamental. Your body is not your weakness. It is your greatest survival technology. Every hormone surge, every metabolic shift, every accelerated heartbeat was not failure. It was design. The first 72 hours revealed the blueprint of being human. Not invincible, not unstoppable, but adaptable, intelligent, resilient under pressure. And as sunlight filters again through the canopy, you understand something deeper than fear. Survival is not dramatic. It is disciplined biology. And discipline is calm. The forest remains vast. The world remains indifferent. But inside you, a system older than civilization
continues its work, breathing, balancing, adapting. Quiet me. And that quiet is no longer something that swallows you. It is something you understand. This is survival science. And what survives is not just the body, it is the regulation of it.
Don't forget to support BioPedia Fact Check. Subscribe now and stay curious with science-backed truths.